Hi, I'm Wes Allen with DM Tales, and Supervember is continuing as today I am looking at Sentinel Comics RPG. Let's roll it. So I had seen Sentinel Comics RPG a couple years ago and did not have the disposable income in order to pick it up. But I did see it for sale Amazon Prime Day over the summer, and even though I typically don't try to buy things on Prime Day, that was too much to pass up, and I did pick it up, and boy am I glad I did. Let's take a look at this interesting game. The process of character creation in SCRPG looks complex because there are a number of steps. But once the lingo becomes familiar, it's rather straightforward. All players need to do is roll the 3 dice indicated by each step and then place the die types they rolled where they're told. The rolls are used to look up values on the current steps table, with players being able to use any 1 die or a combination of any 2 dice to make their selection. So, for example, a player who rolls a 6, 3, and 1 can select one of those 3 numbers off the table, as well as combine 2 of the dice to get 9, 7, and 4. I am a fan of how this mechanic works, as it keeps the random element of character creation alive, which is something I have always loved, while also giving players a range of choices which emerge from their rolls. It's a really neat idea. The process, though, is lengthy, at least for new players like me, so I'm not going to go through all 8 steps for this review. That would be a waste of time. What I would like to do is to do a live stream creating a character for SCRPG at some point in the very near future. I will probably make the actual live stream for members only. So if you want to be in the live chat, be sure to sign up so you can ask questions and be involved in the creation process. But I'm going to make it open to everyone the next day or so you won't miss out. But you want to be in that live chat, go ahead and take a look at membership options. Right now, I want to take a look at the character sheet. So the Sentinel Comics RPG character sheet is a 2-sided, and it has a lot of room to add text. There are physical attributes which take up the first third of the sheet in the upper right corner, but in SCRPG these are descriptive only. They're included to give the player aids in developing their character. More important than their physical attributes is a character's principles. Each character in SCRPG has 2 principles which are at the core of their personality. Each principle lays out some guidance for role-playing. Characters can be hot-headed, analytical, or even hear a voice inside their head. And these principles help players flesh out their characterizations during various scenes. Where principles become interesting, however, is with twists, events which happen in a scene that add complications. Certain actions can trigger twist in the scene and are often tied to a character's principles. Why would you do this? It's so they feel personal. These twists are presented as questions for the players and for the GM to use as a hook in that scene. And while not every twist comes from a character's principles, giving avenues for these scene twists to emerge from the character's values is pretty cool. Now, the mechanical aspect of a character is actually found on the second page in what I'm calling the pool build sections. Sentinel Comics RPG uses a dice pool system with a methodology I've not previously encountered. I'm going to go over how the dice pool works in the mechanics section, but here's how the pools are built. The first die is pulled from the power that is being used for the current attempt. The second is pulled from the qualities the characters had. These are learned traits or skills that they picked up along the way. And then the last die is the character's status die, which changes depending on which status the character has. It's green or yellow or red. We'll talk about status in the next section. 2/3 of the sheet's second page, however, is dedicated to abilities. These are specific ways powers can be used, and they become more and more capable as the character moves towards a red status, which is much more critical. One of the thoughts which popped into my head as I read through the character creation process is that creating an SCRPG character feels a lot like I'm creating a Powered by the Apocalypse playbook, but from scratch. And it's really interesting. One of the most difficult aspects of creating a comic book RPG is trying to capture the feel of a comic book through its mechanics. If the heroes are too powerful and they just roll over everything, then the tension and desperate moments which fill comic book pages won't appear. If the system's too balanced, the heroes won't feel special, and if combat is too tactical, then things can feel just a bit too small. The way SCRPG attempts to bring in the comic book feel is through something they call the GYRO System, which stands for green, yellow, red, out. Each time the color shifts, the risks of the situation increase. New adversaries might arrive, the environment might degrade, such as when a fight takes place in a burning building, or a catastrophic event might inch its way closer to becoming reality. As a character takes damage and loses health, their status decreases as well, shifting from green to yellow to red. And when a character's health reaches 0, they are out for the scene and may only use one special out ability until they recover. But heroes in Sentinel Comics RPG rarely die, just like in real comic books. If a player does feel that their character's story has come to an end, however, they can choose to have that character bow out and then create a new one. Although even this doesn't mean that the character has died. They could just decide to retire, or maybe whatever happened in the battle drained them of their powers. And perhaps one day they could come back. It's a very comic book feel to it. The other way the status may change is through the scene tracker. Each scene has a number of turns spent, each in green, yellow, and red zones, and when the tracker runs out of steps, the scene comes to an abrupt end with some sort of catastrophic event. Now, I'm a big fan of timers, so I love how they're baked right into Sentinel Comics RPG. Because there are two ways to determine status, however, there can be a disparity between a character's personal status and the scene status. SCRPG resolves this by declaring that characters will always use the status that is closer to out. Whether that's their health or the scene tracker, doesn't matter. Whatever's closer to out, that's what you take. As stated earlier, a Sentinel Comics RPG dice pool is created by taking the 3 dice indicated by a character power, quality, and their current status. These 3 dice are rolled and then arranged in numerical order. Now, unless indicated by an ability, and we'll talk about that in a second, these values are not added. Instead, they are referred to as the min die, the mid die, and the max die. Unless an ability says otherwise, the mid die is the value which impacts the target of the action. Choosing a combination of powers and qualities to build a dice pool, though, has got to make narrative sense within the game world. Although players are encouraged to be creative and lean on comic book logic while doing so. A character using their strength power, for example, might be able to add the die from their leadership quality by doing a demonstration of strength to offer an example of resolve, and that boosts their character's actions for the next turn. Creating dice pools and narrating how the combination works in the game world, that may be one of the most entertaining bits of this system. As we mentioned, each character has a number of abilities which are linked to their current gyro status. While each of these abilities is impressive and adds some extra oomph to an action, they grow more and more potent the more desperate the situation becomes. Think of this escalation like a moment a hero's buried under a pile of rubble as the villain is on the cusp of victory, but suddenly an immense blast of their power clears away the rubble and the fight is rejoined. I mean, I literally can see these panels in my head. It's important to note that characters don't lose access to abilities when their gyro status progresses. They can always use the abilities from their current status and those that are below them. Abilities have 3 types. They are actions, reactions, and inherent, and they don't need much explaining. Actions tell a player which power is used for an ability in its description, along with its effects, and inherent abilities are always active, like having a damage reduction ability always in effect. The only real mechanical wrinkle with abilities is with reactions because they don't use dice pools. Rather, a reaction ability uses a single die indicated by the ability's description. Each ability also has an icon associated with it indicating what type of in-game effect it will have, and these are linked to basic action concepts like attack, defend, overcome, boost, hinder, and recover. So let's discuss these now. Most of the basic actions in the game they're basic. Attacks inflict mid-die damage onto a target. Defend reduces incoming damage by the mid-die's value. And there's no attack rolls in this game. Everything just hits. Boosts and hinders are fun because they create modifiers which alter the results of rolls and can be applied to an ally or opponent as the player desires. These modifiers last for one roll unless they are described as persistent. Those are usually triggered by abilities. In that case, a persistent modifier lasts until the end of a scene. These actions don't make direct use of the mid-die, though. Instead, the value of the mid-die is compared to a table, and that determines what the modifier's value is. Reactions, which are tied to abilities, as I described earlier, roll a single die, and that could be a power, a quality, or a status die. But a character may also hit the deck as a defensive reaction and do it as a full defend action with the full dice pool. They'll do this out of turn, and in so doing, they will trigger a minor twist which will complicate the scene. Now, all these actions are simple and interesting, but the most interesting basic action is overcome. This is used any time a character interacts with an obstacle or complication that cannot be avoided. Do you want to save a group of bystanders who are trapped under a collapsing roof? It's an overcome action. Describe how you do it. Do you need to break down an armored door to get to the villain before they complete their dastardly plan? That's an overcome action. Do you need to jump onto the helicopter before the villain escapes? You guessed it, overcome action. I love this. Instead of trying to think up every possible obstacle or complication heroes could face, SCRPG says, look at what powers and qualities you have and try to overcome it. The fiction of how the overcome action is attempted is entirely in the player's hands. Once they describe what they're trying to do, they pull their dice and they roll. And much like boost or hinder actions, the mid-die value is compared to a table, which depicts how the fiction works out for the attempt. Results range from a spectacular failure to succeeding beyond all expectations, but the table has a heavy weight towards success. Although some results require taking either a minor or a major twist in order to get that success. There's just something so comic bookish about all of this. So I've mentioned twists quite a bit so far, but what exactly are they? Think of twists like the panels in comic books where new surprises enter into a conflict. It's like the classic Spider-Man's battling a villain over New York and discovers because of where he's fighting, he's putting Aunt May in danger. That's the idea. And while most are often triggered as a result of overcome actions, they can also be triggered by something called a risky action. And these are basic actions which add a secondary effect to the results, and they always trigger a minor twist. And the environment, which is actually given a turn in the order whenever it's appropriate, can also toss in twists which affect everyone into the scene, heroes and villains alike. Now, minor twists are things which resolve fast. Perhaps a hero takes some damage, they're hindered on their next roll, or they find that they're separated from the rest of the team or are weakened by a die type for a certain ability or quality for just that scene. They aren't meant to be huge setbacks, but they should be noticeable. A major twist sticks around. Perhaps a hero takes a lot of damage, or the scene escalates several steps towards out. Heroes might even lose access to an ability, power, or quality for the duration of the session. They're meant to have a significant impact on the character. With the exception of environment twist, however, which you always have to take, players have the ability to refuse a twist and just take a failure instead. They're also expected to work with the GM to create the twist's narrative so both parties agree what impact it will have inside the game world. SCRPG really is designed from the ground up to be more cooperative than adversarial. Speaking of adversaries, there's 3 basic types of active adversaries in the game, and they are all handled in 2 different ways. The first is minions and lieutenants. Minions and lieutenants are both represented by a single die type, often a D6 for minions and up to a D10 for lieutenants. Every action they take is going to use that single die for its rolls, so if it's a D6, they do D6 damage whenever they target a hero. And also, while there are no 2 hit rolls in this game, every attack automatically hits, both minions and lieutenants get to make something called a save against the amount of damage they take from the attack. If they meet or beat that value with their die, they save against the damage. Now here's the difference. If a minion fails a save, their die type is reduced by 1, and once they're at D4, they stay there until they fail a save. Now if a minion fails a save, no matter what their current die type is, they're just out. They don't get any other steps. Minions most often attack the heroes in swarms equal to the hero's number, but they can get knocked out rather fast. They're pests which take up the team's actions on their way to dealing with the actual problem. Now, aside from being a larger die type, lieutenants differ from minions in one distinct way. They only reduce their die type when they fail a save. This means lieutenants can stay in a conflict much longer than the average minion and cause some serious headaches for the heroes. Lieutenants and minions are really fun concepts. I want to try them out very, very bad. Villains, on the other hand, have powers, qualities, and abilities much like PCs do. This makes them very difficult to take down. But it also feels like a place where it could slow the game down a bit. First, each major villain has a 2-page sheet, much like a player character sheet, and this makes them both less portable and more cumbersome to bring into a scene. And if you do have a scene where there are multiple villains active, well, a GM's area can get cluttered up really, really fast. And second, villains also have a status die like heroes, but it's calculated in different ways. It's not tied to the scene tracker or their health. Some villain status dies are static. That's easy to handle, no problem. Others, however, are dependent on the number of minions they have in the fray, the number of inventions they've deployed, or even the number of heroes with which they are engaged. And while I do appreciate trying to make villains distinct in this way, it feels like a lot of bookkeeping at the table. It's something I'm really pondering. One of the more interesting aspects of SCRPG is how it tracks initiative. That is, it doesn't track initiative. Rather, whoever goes first in a turn is determined by the narrative, and when the players, or the GM's turn is over, they decide who gets to go next. They can also choose to give a heads up to the player they're going to choose or make it a complete surprise. Yay! I think this is a fantastic way for heroes to do combination attacks, and it just feels so much better than having to say, all right, well, I'm going to hold my initiative until just to get that combination 1-2 inside the fiction. Now, with this setup, players might be tempted to have all of their heroes go before the villains and just pass their initiative to each other until all the heroes have gone. But if they did that, all the villains will go at once, and they'll have no actions left to counter what they do. So there's a bit of strategy with this setup, and I do like it. Sessions in Sentinel Comics RPG are called issues, and even the sample adventures in the rulebook are designed to look like actual comic book issue covers. It's really a neat concept. When story arcs are completed after several issues are done, they're bound together in a collection and they're listed on the front of the character sheet, and everybody decides what the title of it is. Okay, so other than being just a cool fictional thing, why is this important? Well, it's because for every collection a character has, they may use those stories to make a one-time alteration to the current issue's fiction. They can even choose to alter one of the results in a dice pool to whatever number they want. Having collections is a powerful tool for players, and it's one of the key ways characters advance inside the game. Now, whenever a collection is used, the player needs to come up with some way to tie the story in, but they can go ahead and make up some small thing that didn't actually happen inside the collection if they were there for all those issues. It just needs to feel like it happened inside that collection. Why can they do this? Because retconning is a cherished tradition in the comic book industry, and they bring it into the game. Really neat. Sentinel Comics RPG is a beautiful book, and that starts with the book construction. It's 438 pages with a lot of back pages after the index, which actually ends on page 438. It's full-sized, 8.5 by 11 inches, and it's sewn binding, and it opens really, really well. The cover features several of the heroes who are used as examples in the book, and the layout has vibes of some old books about how to create comic books. And there's penciled, partly complete drawings behind the main characters, which help give it this vibe. I like it a lot. The rear cover is just a simple write-up of what's included inside the book, but it shows off some of the design style that appears inside, and it works well enough. The interior cover pages, though, wow. Sentinel Comics never existed. It's a fictional comic book company, and both the characters and the lore emerged from a collectible card game. But on those interior cover pages is a montage of comic book covers, and I want to read them. This is a really cool immersive tool to make this feel like it's actually working with superheroes from actual comic books. It's neat. The paper that's used for the book feels like the paper that's used in a lot of trade paperback collections that I've picked up over the years, which unfortunately means that it's glossy. The upper corner of the book on my copy got bent a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that's because of Amazon shipping, and it's not a knock on the build quality itself, which is actually pretty good. SCRPG also lacks a book ribbon, so I'll give the physical design a small ding for that because I love my book ribbons, but it's still really nice. The magic of this product, though, it comes into focus with the interior layout, and wow. First, the body font is just an easy-to-read sans serif font. It's presented with some nice line and paragraph spacing, so it's easy to digest. Headings use a comic book style font, and top-level headings are set in a gradient box with some exaggerated dithering dots behind the text, which is a quite cool effect. Second-level headings are the same font in blue, and third-level headings are black and slightly smaller. The book is presented in a 2-column layout, but there are some nice elements to break up the text walls. There's 2 colors of callouts in the book, one with a blue background and the other with a peach color. The first is for player-facing advice, and the second is for GMs. These are mostly presented as single-column designs, and they have a nice indent on the lower right corner that helps it sit out just a little bit. But there are certain GM callouts which take up 2 columns, and they have their own style of heading title that makes them look like comic book panels. It's pretty cool. When a new concept is introduced to the game, SCRPG will give examples of play in the form of single-column comic strips, breaking up a text wall and being really, really cool in the process. These depict the GM and players working through the fiction, and they do a fantastic job of helping make the game make sense. Chapter titles look like title frames from the comic books of my youth, but set as a full 2-page spread. The chapter title is big and bold on the right page, along with a table of contents for the chapter, where the credits might appear in a comic book. And the rest of the spread is filled with glorious art. Brilliant. And I really cannot say enough about how wonderful the artwork in this book is. Everything has life and motion and feeling, but it's the faux issue covers for the example adventures that might be the high point for me. I want someone to write these adventures as comic books so I can both play and read them. They are neat. Pages don't have headers in SCRPG, but over in the right margin, there is a tracker which shows both the current chapter, which is highlighted, and where that chapter stands in relationship to the rest of the book. It's lovely and really helps navigation a lot. Footers show the page number, which is set in a starburst callout in the outer margins, with the current section inside a comic book style narrative cell next to it. This is one of the most beautiful TTRPG books I have ever read. This is the fastest I've read a TTRPG rulebook of this size in a long while. Now, I have to admit, I still need to finish going through the hero and villain galleries, but they're pretty easy to skim. I've gotten through the vast majority of the book. It's that good. Now, there are some things that I'd like to see tweaked. The amount of record keeping needed to calculate a villain's status is one of the big ones, as is finding a way to shrink down the villain's sheets just a tad from a full 2 pages. There's also some points on running the game in the bullpen section. Again, that's a comic book term, and I love it. I think they could have benefited from a little bit of clarification, maybe in a clarifying comic strip or 2. But for the most part, their GM advice is very solid and clear. This is a great book to read. Now, I don't think that SCRPG is for everyone. Folks who need grids to feel the immersion would be frustrated by Sentinel Comics' pure narrative approach to action, for example. But it's got me thinking, and I'd like to try to get this around a table at some point and maybe even run a convention game using it. Why? Well, because it manages to capture a comic book feel in a way that I've just not seen before. And that includes the old classic Marvel Superheroes RPG, which I do think is the gold standard, but there are elements here that even improve on that. You might want to check this one out. You can order this book through Greater Than Games website for $59.95, but this is one of those rare occasions where I'd be remiss to not point out that Amazon has had this game on a serious discount for months. I've seen it listed even as far as below $20, and as of this review, it's listed at $28.11. The PDF, which can be purchased through either Greater Than Games website or Drive-Thru RPG, that's going for $29.95. So get the book from Amazon. You can get it for cheaper than the PDF. Now, I do think that that's a little bit steep for a PDF, but I do think I'm going to be picking it up pretty soon because this is a game that has me excited to try it out, and I want to make sure that I have it at my hands. Supervember is continuing, but with a bit of a detour. I had said I was going to be looking at the Marvel Multiverse RPG after Sentinel Comics RPG, but I've tried reading it before, and I really don't care for how it's designed. And after reading this book, which I loved, it would just feel like a little bit of a downer. I want to get into this book eventually, but I'm not going to do it for this month. So instead, I picked up Advanced Phase Rip. This is a retro clone of the old Marvel Superheroes game, which I love to this day. So I'm interested to see how I take to this modern retro clone of it. I'm also working on my PAX Unpledged schedule, and I can announce that I'm going to be running a game of Numenera in Monty Cook Games' room on Friday afternoon. They're going to be in the main concourse at the entryway this year, so that's a really cool position for them. I'm looking forward to working with them. So if you want to come and play a game with me, that's where I'm going to be. I think I start at 2 o'clock. And until we see each other again, folks, happy playing, everyone.